All right, I'm going to get started. I'm really excited to be hosting this Antarctica Day celebration. Antarctica Day was officially on December 1st, and today is December 4th, 2017, at least in North America. But that's all right. We still want to celebrate all the interesting things about Antarctica, and we had a great opportunity to do a webinar, hopefully from the South Pole. Our teacher, Lesley Anderson, should be joining us in a little bit. We have researcher Dr. Jim Madsen, who is in the webcam, and he'll be talking today as well. Today's celebration is going to be, and this webinar is going to be archived, and we hope that we have a decent archive. Sometimes we have issues with them, but we'll share it with you online and send it out to everybody that registered. Today's event is co-shared and co-hosted by our Spaces, and I think we'll post a link to that in a little while. We are also working with the research team from the IceCube, and PolarTREC itself is administered by the Arctic Research Consortium of the United States. So we're excited about that. Somebody else just joined. If you joined us by phone, is it Lesley Anderson from South Pole? Are you with us yet?
Excuse me, Janet. This is Judy. You're breaking up.
Oh.
I think it's hard to hear
Okay.
you.
Is that better? Better?
Just a little bit.
Okay. Well, Judy, you may have to take over talking if I'm breaking up.
Oh, that's better.
Okay. Sorry about that. So let's get started. We're waiting to hear from Lesley Anderson, and I don't know if she's joined us by phone or not. So Lesley, if you're out there, please go ahead and say something. In the meantime, we're going to go through this platform. It's called Adobe Connect. And you should see the slides changing in the center. There's a text area where everybody's introducing themselves and telling us about their wonderful weather. And then we have the webcam with Dr. Jim Madsen and a list of participants. So this event is being archived, like I said, and we'll share it with you later. If you haven't done so, please type your name and where you're from, and if you have students with you, so we know who is joining us. And a big activity that is trying to capture where everybody is participating for Antarctica Day is a virtual balloon place on our Spaces, and there's the link. And after this event, we encourage you to go to ourspaces.org.uk/antarcticaday.html and launch your virtual balloon that you participated in an event, and that's pretty fun. And if you missed this link, it's also available through just going to ourspaces.org. You'll find it there. So before I turn this presentation over to Dr. Madsen, just a little bit about PolarTREC. It's a program where we send teachers like Lesley Anderson, hopefully we'll hear from her soon, to places like the South Pole and to Arctic locations. We're funded by the National Science Foundation, and we're run by a nonprofit based in Fairbanks, Alaska called the Arctic Research Consortium of the United States. And we've been sending teachers with researchers like Dr. Madsen for over 10 years, and it's a great opportunity for teachers to learn about polar science and bring that experience back into their classroom. And we have Lesley is just starting her expedition, and I put the link in the public chat area to the IceCube project, where she'll be posting journals and be able to respond to your questions while she's out in the field. Speaking of questions, if you have questions, probably the easiest way for this presentation is for you to just type them in the chat area, and Judy and myself will relay them to Jim and Lesley as they present, and we'll try to make sure everybody's questions get responded to. Okay, do we have Lesley yet? I don't see her. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to you, Jim,
All right.
and have you explain everything. All right.
All right. So one of the things I'll just say very quickly is sometimes people use the term South Pole and Antarctica interchangeably. So when I've been to Antarctica 5 times, and 4 of those times I went to the South Pole. But if I say, occasionally I'll say, you know, I've been to the South Pole, and people say, oh, I went to a cruise to the South Pole, right? Which is clearly not possible. You see, that's the South Pole, almost dead center in the continent there. McMurdo Station is where the U.S. Large U.S. base is, and that's where we fly into originally. And so I think we're going to have more about that in a bit. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, and so you know, the history of Antarctic exploration, it's just a little over 100 years ago that people started trying to reach the South Pole. And so if you want to hear some incredible adventure stories or read about some incredible adventures, I highly recommend the books on the early explorers. They endured amazing hardships, and what was even more you know, mind-boggling is many of them went back 2 and 3 times. And I don't know how they would get the fortitude to face the types of conditions they did and then go back again, but it really gets in your blood. And so it is quite a special place. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. So you know, the first person to reach the South Pole was Roald Amundsen, right? And you know, it's quite a famous story. He was originally going to go to the North Pole, and then found out as he was heading there that that had been reached, and so decided that he would change course. And at the same time, Scott had planned an expedition, right? And so Amundsen reached the South Pole and returned. Scott's team made it to the South Pole, but they all died on the way back. Okay, roughly about that same time, there was this discovery also of these particles coming from outer space called cosmic rays. And one of the ways they determined that they were in fact coming from outer space and not some type of radiation emanating from the Earth was by going up in a balloon and measuring the rate at which they saw particles. And so that's this famous Victor Hess photo and his experiments. So kind of a first space science one. Okay, so these particles that come from outer space have this amazingly wide range of energies, including particles that have energies more than 1,000,000 times higher than the ones we can produce at the best machines on Earth. And so where they're coming from and how they get such high energies remains a mystery. And so it's one of the motivators for this project. Next slide. Okay. So the story of the Antarctic Treaty really starts with the International Geophysical Year, or for the people that hang around with this, we always call this the IGY. And that was a celebration, right, of kind of this Earth science. Okay, and that led to people expressing interest in protecting Antarctica as a sanctuary for science and the environment. So we'll go to the next slide, please. Okay. So the Antarctic Treaty was first proposed. There were 12 in 1959. There were 12 original countries that had some connection with Antarctic exploration that were part of that original treaty. It wasn't actually signed until 1961. So that may seem like a long time, but for a large international agreement, that's moved in diplomatic terms rather quickly. And so each year they set up a ceremonial pole that looks like that barber pole in the middle there with a reflecting globe for people to get their picture taken, and they put the 12 flags out from the original countries that signed the Antarctic Treaty. Next slide. And so basically the idea is to preserve the environment down there. And so it's quite amazing. They have what they call a Nonnative Species Act. And so it not only protects the environment in terms of, like you might think of in terms of preserving the pristine nature, but also to try and prevent the introduction of exotic species there. So it's been remarkably successful, and maybe gives us hope at times when we think we can't come together. It remains in effect to this day, much past the original 30-year time limit of the original agreement, which basically is just renewed indefinitely until someone decides they want to hold a conference and open up those negotiations again. Okay, next slide. And so, as I say, what we're trying to do with these projects that Lesley is working on, that I'm associated with, is figure out what are the sources of these extremely high energy particles that are coming from outer space. And so to do that, we have to look in new ways. And so that's what this project's all about. That picture, even though we don't have Lesley on the phone or on the computer, that's Lesley at the South Pole. So not a Photoshop, she made it there. That's quite an accomplishment in itself. We had people that went down at station opening and that have spent more than 2 weeks on the coast of Antarctica waiting for the weather to improve. So she got in there at a pretty good time. Next slide. Okay. So how do you get to Antarctica? Well, we go commercial flights to Christchurch, New Zealand. You get your cold weather gear there. And then if you're lucky, one day after you arrive in New Zealand, get your cold weather gear. The next day you fly to the coast of Antarctica to McMurdo Station. And I always say it's a warning for looking at any brochures from a travel. All right, that might have been Lesley.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No,
okay.
It's all good.
All right.
Sorry about that.
And so McMurdo in this picture looks like not a bad place, and it's a wonderful place to be, but it's kind of dusty and dirty because it's on a volcanic island. And so when you're there, it doesn't look quite so bright and cheery as in this photo. But in the summer months, it's quite reasonable temperature-wise. In fact, even gets above freezing. So not quite that warm yet, though. Next slide. Okay, but there's somewhere, depending on the season, between 800 and 1,200 people on the coast in Antarctica at McMurdo Station in the summer. And so even when you're there, if you tell people you're going to the South Pole, they are quite jealous because there's only about 10% or fewer people that get to go to the South Pole from McMurdo. So only about 150 people in the summer months at the South Pole. So this is the new South Pole Station. It's actually quite nice. You get your own berth usually now, sleeping room. There's showers twice a week for 3 minutes, so that's wonderful. There's a gym, there's a galley for where they feed you, so it's actually quite nice. Next slide. So this is a artist rendition of the IceCube detector. It is kind of difficult to convey just how huge it is, but just to give you some numbers here, the ice at the South Pole is almost 3,000 meters thick. So, you know, not quite 2 miles, but, you know, 1 mile and 2/3 thick. And it turns out some of the most pure material found anywhere in the world. And so for a physicist, we look at that and we say, wow, that would make a great detector to look for particles from outer space. So that's what we turned it into by melting holes. You see there's a picture on the lower left there of one of the light sensors going down a hole. The way we made that hole was to use hot water. We melted that hole 2,450 meters down, then lowered the cable every 17 meters, put one of those light sensors on, 60 in each hole. So the bottom 1,000 meters has 60 of them. Altogether, there's 86 holes like that, so over 5,000 light sensors. And they look for particles coming from outer space that make a small amount of light when they go through the ice. So next slide. Okay, so this is the quick science lesson. There's way too much detail on here, but here's the big picture. Space is too big for us to go out and explore directly, so the way we do any type of astronomy, right, is we have to make a telescope that will see particles that have been created from space. So the first people just use their eyes and they look for light, visible light. Then we made the telescopes that could collect fainter amounts of light. And now we have all different types of telescopes that measure everything from very low energy light called radio waves to very high energy light called gamma rays. All right? And what we've done is made a telescope that can see almost invisible particles called neutrinos. But the idea is the same. There's some energetic either phenomena or explosion, and it puts out neutrinos, and we want to try to see how many, what energy they have, and which direction they're coming from. Okay. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So what sets how far apart you put the detectors in the ice is kind of how clear the ice is and what you're trying to measure. So what I like to use to describe this is if you imagine going out fishing, if you are looking for very big fish, right, and especially if the fish are big and rare, you would like to make as large a net as possible. But the net would be very expensive and real heavy if it was finely woven. So if you're just looking for big fish, you can make the net larger for the same amount of money if you make it the weaving quite open. So what we did with IceCube is, as I say, it's quite large, 125 meters apart. But even that, it turns out there's even bigger fish that are rarer. That net is still too fine. So what the Askaryan Radio Array project does is use a different technology. Instead of using light sensors, it puts radio wave sensors or antennas in the ice, and you can put those 1,000 meters apart. So now you can make a detector, you know, that's 10 times bigger than IceCube for much less money than IceCube. The disadvantage is just like that big fishing net that's really open, all the smaller fish swim through and we never catch those. So it can see very high energy particles, but only very high energy particles. So that's still under construction, and so those are the two projects that Lesley's going to work on. Next slide. All right. So I'll say a little bit about this, and then Janet, if you want to, or Judy want to say more, you're welcome. This PolarTREC is incredible, right? there are very few people who get to travel to Antarctica, and even, as I said, a smaller number who get to go to the South Pole. But the incredible thing is we get to provide these opportunities for some teachers to go. Lesley is now the 8th teacher that I've had work with me with IceCube and its predecessor called Amanda. And they really do become part of our research team. The population is so tight that we can't afford to have people just observing down there. So Lesley's going to be out in the field, pulling cables and digging holes and doing everything else that people do. So you can be a part of this in a number of different ways. You can follow the expeditions. You're already participating in these Polar Connects, but they have these for almost all the teachers that are employed both in the Arctic and the Antarctic. There's an email list you can join. They generate all these resources. If you're so inclined and you're an adventurous type, you can apply to become a teacher, or if you happen to be a researcher, to host a teacher, and you can join ARCUS. Did you want to add anything, Janet or Judy?
Hi, this is Janet. Sorry, I was trying to connect Lesley from the South Pole while you were talking there, Jim. She's having some technical difficulties, so I was trying my best to add her to the phone call. So I'm going to let Judy talk about PolarTREC, and then I'm going to try Lesley one more time while you guys chat. And if there's any questions, please feel free to respond to them, or people feel free to type them into the chat area, and it looks like there are questions.
Yes, this is Judy. So I think actually Jim really explained PolarTREC wonderfully, and I will place a link for the Polar Education email list. That's a great way to follow what's going on with PolarTREC teachers and different events that are happening within both poles. If people have questions, please type them in the chat area, and we can ask Jim while Janet is trying to connect Lesley. I think, let's see, the first question I saw was actually about what temperature it is, but since we don't have Lesley on the line, we can't ask her the temperature down there yet, but when she's on, we'll ask her. Let's see. Jim, you've been down there many times, though. Can you tell us the temperature?
Yeah, so I went and looked quickly to see, and what it says today is it's minus 25, and that's kind of a typical summer temperature, kind of around minus 15, minus 10 is typically the warmest it will get during the summer. The station itself opens when it gets about minus 45 Fahrenheit. So those are.
And I have a question myself. Is there much difference between temperatures between the South Pole and, say, McMurdo?
Huge, yeah. So, you know, it's probably 20, 25 degrees above zero at the coast of Antarctica. So, yeah, it's, you know, you can wear shorts, especially after you get back from the South Pole.
Okay. We have a question from Mike H. Besides penguins, what other wildlife have you seen at McMurdo Station and beyond?
So, you know, here's the kind of funny thing is people think you must see lots and lots of penguins, but I have never seen a penguin at McMurdo Station. I was lucky. I had a friend who did research at a penguin colony on Cape Royds, and I got to go out, and there were thousands of penguins there. But those are the only penguins I've ever seen in Antarctica. If you happen to be at McMurdo, and of course at the South Pole, you never see penguins. It's very rare that they have penguins come into that spot. So the other wildlife, there are these giant seagulls called skuas that are quite aggressive. And so you see them. If you come outside and you're carrying something that looks like food, they swoop down at you, and you know, they can be a little intimidating, but they're not dangerous. All the wildlife is protected, so kind of a funny story is one day when we were there, we were going to go to take a van, and a skua, the seagulls landed on top of the van, and by treaty you can't disturb the wildlife, so they couldn't do anything to move it away. They couldn't drive off when it was there. They just had to go find another van and drive. Right? So then there are seals. If you're fortunate enough to get out on a ship, you see killer whales. And then the other kind of neat thing is at McMurdo they do work on the different types of creatures you find in the water. So they have a touch tank. So I got to hold a number of different things that live in the water, including like giant sea fleas and things like that. So, but in terms of what you see wildlife-wise, there's not a lot, you know, no land creatures besides the penguins.
Okay. We have a question from Ms. Siebert's class. What kind of clothing do you wear outside in Antarctica?
Yeah, that's a great, they put the picture back up. On the coast, as I say, it is, especially if you come from a cold place like Wisconsin, like I do, it is quite nice, and you know, you can get by with just your blue jeans and some tennis shoes and maybe a fleece top. Unless you're going out for a hike or something, then you need to bring all your cold weather gear. So at the pole, you know, it's going to be 25 below or so. And again, it kind of depends on whether you're going to be working outside or whether you're going out to a place to work inside. So the IceCube Laboratory is about 1 kilometer away from the station. And so that's really not too bad a walk. And after a while, you get used to it, and so we often didn't even wear the big red, we call it. But they give you multiple layers, so just like if you've ever been in cold weather situations, they tell you to, you know, to wear layers. And so it starts with long underwear, and then there's some fleece, and then there's wind pants, and then on like that. What's unusual, and what Lesley, I'm sure, would not be outside very long, is to have her face uncovered. She just did that so you could see that it was Lesley. But it only takes, you know, a minute or so before that gets to be a problem at those temperatures.
Okay. We have a question from Steele. The students would like to know how someone can become a scientist or works in Antarctica.
So it's interesting when I ask, when I give talks, who'd like to go to Antarctica, usually only about half the audience raises their hand. So, so the good news is not everybody wants to go to Antarctica. The bad news is that many, many more people want to go than there are spaces available. And so first, it helps that if you're from the U.S., because we have the largest Antarctic program. And so for countries that don't have Antarctic programs, then they have to partner with a U.S. collaborator, right? And so the way I work with both this large project, IceCube, but I also work with a smaller project just with one other researcher at the University of Delaware. And we write a proposal, say we have this project, it can only be done in Antarctica, here's what we're going to learn, and then other people read those and decide what is the best use of the resources available. So the short answer is, if you want to be a scientist, is you study hard and then keep working, and a lucky few get to end up in Antarctica.
I want to interrupt real quick and see if Lesley joined. Lesley, can you hear us yet?
I can hear you. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Yay, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry, there's a lot of technical difficulties.
That's okay. Dr. Madsen's been going through the presentation, and he's just now answering and responding to some questions. So we don't know how long we'll have you, so maybe why don't you just tell us, Lesley, a little bit about what you've experienced so far. There were people wondering how cold it was. Have you seen any wildlife? So maybe just capture and bring us up to speed on what it's like right now for you.
Absolutely. So we actually had a really easy a couple days getting down to the South Pole. For the week before, we had some really bad storms in McMurdo, and so a lot of people got backlogs for a couple of days. They were up for like 10 days. We're behind and trying to get down to the South Pole. So we're actually very lucky. We left from Christchurch and arrived in McMurdo at 8 p.m., and we had to check our bags in at 10 p.m., and we left at 9 a.m. the next morning to head to the pole. So we barely had 12 hours in McMurdo before we had to leave, and that's very rare. Most people had to get their planes turned back around or were grounded because of bad storms. The whole time I've been here, the weather has been beautiful, knock on wood. We've had really clear skies. It's been at the pole about minus 27 degrees Fahrenheit, and then that's about minus 50 with wind chill. It's anywhere between 4 and 9 knots of wind every day, and it usually picks up, the wind usually picks up in the afternoon. But it's been pretty easy working conditions. When we're outside for about 3 hours at a time, we'll have to go inside every couple minutes just to let our hands warm up. But in the big red parka, it's actually pretty warm and toasty.
Great. We have a lot of people saying hello to you. We do have a question from Ron Harris's group. He teaches 7- and 8-year-olds. He said they're curious what you eat, how do you get around, especially in winter, and do you visit other research stations, and what is life, day-to-day life like there?
So I've only been at the pole for about 3 days, and this is the final day of kind of getting acclimated with altitude sickness, and I got hit pretty hard the first couple of days. So it's very difficult to breathe. Air's really thin at 10,000 feet. So getting off the plane and walking to the station was a couple hundred feet, and by the time I got to the top of the stairs, I couldn't breathe anymore. And I felt like I'm gasping for air all the time. Today's the 3rd day that I'm here, and it feels a lot easier to breathe. It's not 100% back to my normal. I still walk up the stairs and have to kind of stop and catch my breath for a moment. But aside from that, getting around the station is pretty easy to do. It kind of feels like a mix between I'm on a cruise ship and I'm in like an International Space Station. The food is actually delicious. They have some of the best chefs that are working here. You can actually volunteer to work in the kitchen. I'm not a great cook myself, but I think I'd like to volunteer just so I can learn how to become a better cook. The food we have ranges from a bunch of different things. We usually have a meat dish. If we're lucky, we get freshies, which are fresh fruits and vegetables. For that week before I arrived, when there were no flights that were going back and forth between the pole and McMurdo, they actually ran out of freshies. So our flight actually brought over a bunch of new fresh food for people. They're very excited. There was a welcoming committee that was there waiting for us, so they're excited for all the cargo that was coming off. But the food is actually really, really delicious. They make everything from scratch. So the bread that they make, the pie crust that they make, I'm eating very, very well while I'm here. And then as far as getting around outside, to get out to some of the really far stations that are away from where we're staying, people will take different types of traverse vehicles. So there's like little tractor things that will move around. But snowmobiles are actually one of the things that we will use to get out to the far parts of the field. I haven't gone out on a snowmobile yet, but I'm definitely looking forward to getting snowmobile certified.
That's exciting. So while you were talking, Lesley, one of our participants just pointed out, and I think they might be true, is that they are in Nunavut, Canada, and they think that talking to you today, this is quite possibly the longest distance phone call in the world that's going on right now.
That is probably absolutely true. That's really awesome.
It is pretty funny to think about that. Okay, so you got seasick or altitude sickness. That's pretty interesting. Let me see what other questions came up that were for you. Oh, well, earlier people were wondering about wildlife. I know you weren't in McMurdo very long, and you probably might not have seen a lot when you flew, but have you seen any wildlife?
So on the trek from the C-130 plane that landed in McMurdo to the actual station, it's about an hour-long, I want to say bus ride, but it's kind of in this like massive giant bus that treks over the ice. We actually went past these pressure ridges where these giant Weddell seals are laying out. They can come up between the ice cracks, and so we actually got to see them basking in the sun. They're a little bit too far away for me to take good photos of them. They kind of just look like little lines, but they're so big out there you can actually see them amidst the large ice sheets that are out there. So those are the only real wildlife that I've seen, but my students will be happy to know I made it down to the touch tank in the Marine Science Laboratory and got a chance to touch some of the animals that have that polar gigantism that we were talking about. It's pretty crazy stuff to watch some of these marine science scientists that are working with these animals. Most of them have this antifreeze protein inside so that they don't freeze. When I put my hand in the touch tank, it was like -1 degree Celsius. So it hurt to have my hand in there for more than like a couple seconds. But it was really cool to get a chance to see some of those animals.
Okay, and another question that's for you. From the Takatna School in Alaska, they want to know what time it is at the South Pole right now.
Right now it is 8 o'clock in the morning, but it looks pretty much the same if it was 8 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock in the morning. The sun just kind of goes around in a circle. So it's pretty disorienting when you get up in the middle of the night, to go to the bathroom or something. It'll be 3 in the morning and you'll look outside and it looks like it's 3 in the afternoon. So the sun just kind of makes its little way around. For the people who have been here a while, they can kind of tell what time it is based on the direction or the angle at which the sun is. For me, it just looks light all the time.
What day is it?
I asked somebody who's been here for, we're 1 day ahead, so it's actually December 5th for me right now. And I asked somebody that has been here for a couple of months, I said, what's the thing that you miss the most about being at home? And he said, I'm really excited to go home and see night. So it does start to mess with me a little bit, seeing it be bright outside all the time.
The kids from Alaska can relate to that.
Oh yeah.
Another student would like to know how you get fresh water to drink. Do you take water with you, or do you have a water purification system?
Great question. So I actually haven't gone on the tour yet. There's a tour where you can go out and you can watch them drilling in order to make the water, but they actually make all the water here at the South Pole. Somebody was asking if they even sell bottled water here, and the answer is no. The water that we make here is probably the freshest water that's on the planet. They put a drill way down into the ice, a couple hundred meters, and then they use really hot water to make a little pocket. And then the more that they heat that up, the water will just continue to expand. And then you can pump that water back out and it goes straight into the station. We are on a limited reserve of the water that we have here. So we prioritize water for, for washing hands and for drinking, especially at high altitudes. It's really important to stay hydrated. But the remainder of the water, we only get to use 2 minutes of showers twice a week. So we're really kind of limited in how much water we're allowed to use for recreational purposes, I guess you can call it.
Okay. Your class, your students are wondering, Lesley, about navigation at the South Pole, meaning a compass wouldn't work properly, correct? How do you know which way to go? Question mark.
That's a really great question, guys. So one of the really interesting things about the South Pole is that there are actually 3 different pole markers. So there's the ceremonial pole, the geographic pole, and I just posted about both of those in my most recent PolarTREC journal, but I haven't actually visited the magnetic South Pole yet. I'm planning on doing a science experiment that a bunch of students South Pole experiment contest, and we're going to be doing their experiment at the magnetic South Pole with some iron filings to see what happens. And I'll report back when we find out how that works down here at the South Pole. But we really we're not using compasses to get around down here. We're pretty much using vision. We're not really going far enough away from the station where we would need a compass in order to be able to navigate to come back. Not really sure how orienteers would do that. People that are trying to get to the South Pole or go away from the South Pole. That's a really great question.
So just a quick correction. So the magnetic South Pole is actually quite a ways away from the South Pole, so you're not going to get a chance to visit that one.
I thought that's where we have to do the experiment.
You're just going to look at South Poles of magnets.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll read back through that. Thanks, Jim.
So there were several questions about the IceCube project itself. So let's see if we can jump back to those while Jim is here and while you're still connected. Sorry, trying to figure out where they went to. There was a question from Ben Holt. And this went to a slide, which I'll try to find out, but he was asking, what is the surface spatial extent of the array, so about the IceCube array, how close to the station is the closest pole or cable, and do the cables then run back to the main station to view activity or functionality of the hole/cable? So maybe we'll have Jim touch on that one, and then we'll get back to you, Lesley.
Yeah. So Leslie's probably walked out there, right? Have you gone out to the IceCube lab, Lesley?
I haven't been to ICL yet. I've been helping the ARA drilling team because they're about 2 weeks behind. So I've actually been doing some drilling with their group.
Leslie's been doing real work because the IceCube lab is pretty.
Yeah,
it's pretty comfortable if you have to just go out and work at the IceCube lab. The distances on from one side of the detector to the other is about 1,000 meters, and it's a little over 1,000 meters from the station out to the IceCube laboratory. We have all our computers and everything are in that building, so the data gets collected and stored out there. It doesn't have to get sent back to the main building. I think that was all the questions, right?
Yep, and we have one more question from Jennifer Mayo, and she asks, how does IceCube inform workspace telescopes, Hubble and the like, and vice versa?
So we have what we call alerts, and so the amazing thing is we see about 3,000 events a second, and we're able to, the computers are fast enough now, we can look at those in real time, and if we see something interesting, we can send an alert out and say to other telescopes, hey, we saw something from this direction, maybe you should take a look and see if you see anything interesting out there. In the same way, they send alerts to us, and that isn't so important in terms of what our telescope is doing because we look in all directions all the time, but it tells us to make sure that we look at the data from that period extra close to see if we see something that corresponds to something that was detected by another telescope. So there's some real exciting things I think you'll hear about in the next month or two where that type of capability made some interesting results possible.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim. There are some people that are having some audio difficulties. I don't know what to tell you at this time other than maybe just try reconnecting. We'll make sure Jim and Lesley both talk slowly and clearly into their microphones. That might help. We have questions that came up. Let me go back to them. Ms. Siebert's class, let's see, we already addressed what time it was down there and the navigation. Oh yeah, so for Ms. Siebert's class, what research are you currently working on? So they might have missed the earlier part of the presentation. And Lesley, you said something, you've been helping out other people, so would you care to explain what you have been doing?
Sure. So I spent the first 2 days really just getting acclimated because it was really difficult to go outside when you're having a hard time breathing inside. So yesterday was my first day working with the drilling team, and I'll be working with them again this afternoon. Basically, we're getting a really, really big driller ready to go help to deploy the new ARA sensors. And so they're about 2 weeks behind, as I mentioned before, because they got delayed like everybody else. And so we're right now just trying to get the last couple pieces together on this drilling sled. And then we'll be towing it out pretty far from the station. About 7 kilometers is the farthest distance we'll go. And then we'll be setting up a little portable station while we're out there. So we can start to do, it'll probably be about 12-hour drilling days for us to be able to drill into the holes. So I'll probably be helping with some of that as well. But right now we're just working on the deployment of the big drill.
Okay. Let's see. We have a question, again, from Ms. Siebert's class. What do you do on your downtime?
Well, there's actually a lot of things going on at the station always. At the top of every staircase, there's a week ahead of a bunch of different activities that are going on around the station. And these are usually activities that start around 6 in the evening. Most people will finish working around 5 in the evening. We'll go to dinner, and then there will be events that will happen. I think tonight there's a badminton tournament in the gym, and I think there's also trivia coming up this week. We had a volleyball game on Friday. There's tennis. I think one of the things that our IceCube group is starting to plan is we're going to try and host a very short, probably a 3 to 6 hole 3-par golf tournament outside. So that'll be a really interesting thing for us to try and get going. We're going to try and do it on the tarmac on a day when we don't have any 30 flights coming in. That'll kind of be our fairway. So there's a bunch of different activities from really active things. They've got a couple different lounges that are here. There's a movie room. You can check out movies. There's a video game lab, so there's a bunch of people in there playing video games. There's a pool table, foosball tables, darts, pretty much anything that you would expect or want to have in a little, you can have that here. So it's kind of, I never feel like I'm bored. I've also spent a lot of time volunteering at the store. I did mail my 500 postcards, so I felt a little bit obligated to spend some time working and helping to stock shelves and things like that. So we spend some time volunteering. It's a really, really friendly working environment. Everybody helps everybody out, so kind of nice to be able to help people out really early on in my time here at the pool.
Very good. Someone was excited about soccer. Did you mention soccer in there?
We do have indoor soccer that people played. I'm not quite at the condition where I think I could play any soccer. But hopefully in about a week or so, I will be at a little bit better. I'll have acclimated a little bit better and be able to play a couple games.
Yeah,
They're posting outdoor soccer.
The first time I went, I played soccer outside, and they discontinued it. Within a few years, they decided it was too many injuries. So, yeah.
Speaking of injuries, there is a question from another person about, are there any doctors available in case of emergencies?
Yes, there are, and I've actually met the doctor a couple different times. There are 2 doctors that are here at the South Pole Station right now. They have regular walk-in appointment hours, which are like Monday through Saturday, but they're also on call 24 hours. So if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're really sick, you can call them, you can radio them, and they're happy to come in and kind of take care of you. I think the thing, I did ask them, what's the thing that you see most often? Usually people coming down with a cold, and it's not so much the regular traditional cold that you might see. It's more a dry cough that you get because it's really dry here. And so people come in a lot with a really sore throat, and so they're trying to help them with that. And also with altitude sickness, the transition for the first 72 hours is really challenging, and so people will come in to get a prescription for Diamox, which is an altitude sickness medication there. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. And then cuts and scrapes are really, really prevalent, and they don't heal as easily because the air is so dry here. So if you get even a little small cut on your finger, it'll take 2 weeks to heal as opposed to a couple of days, just because of the lack of humidity that's here.
Okay, that's good to know, though, that you're recovering from the altitude and that life should be better. There was another question. Oh, Judy was wondering, and maybe both Jim and you can answer this, how long do people stay at the South Pole, and do people overwinter there?
They do. I think the maximum is, Jim, you can tell me if this is right or not, I think the maximum amount of time you're allowed to stay in Antarctica is 14 months. And then you are required to leave the continent and go back to your home residence, and then you can reapply to get back to the South Pole or back to the continent.
There are people
correct,
who
Jim?
basically have been there for almost in perpetuity. So I think it's true you have to reapply, as you say, but then what they tend to do is move to another project, right? And so for IceCube, we hire people to winter over, and they spend 13 months, so they overlap 1 month with the new people that come in. And then the scientists typically go for about 3 weeks. The support staff, many go for the whole summer, which would be 3 to 4 months.
Okay, so let's see, there was mostly comments about saying thanks from Mrs. Siebert's class. My students and I are amazed at all you can do there. And then there was another comment from Ben who says he spent 2 summers working with you on sea ice and that you studied great white sharks. We'll have to hear about that someday. And I wanted to relay that we'll take
a quick comment.
Go ahead.
I do have a quick comment for Ben. I have a quick comment for Ben if he's still on. Ben, you remember me reading through all of those Arctic journals from Amundsen and the Freyam, and I'm actually looking right now at a real copy of the journal of the Freyam. We were reading the copies together in the NASA lab, but it's really cool to actually see the hard copy here behind a glass case right in front of me.
Great.
That is way. Yes, she might be able to hear you. I heard you. Okay, let's see. There was another question from an Anderson. They probably are a relative. Do they have a problem with people getting dehydrated down there?
Yeah, dehydration is a big challenge. They really encourage you to drink a lot of water while you're here, and I've been drinking normally I'll drink 1 to 2 bottles of water a day, and I'm drinking 6 or 7 bottles of water a day. And then Diamox actually also makes you have to pee a lot more frequently. So that is the challenge, the trade-off by taking the altitude sickness medication. A lot of people find that challenging, and so they'll drink less water. But it's important, really important to stay hydrated. People remind you all the time, where's your water? Where's your water? Have you had something to drink yet today? And there's water stations everywhere, so that's really helpful to have.
I remember it being particularly diabolical that you have to both drink a lot of water and take medicine that makes you want to go to the bathroom.
We had a thanks, Jim and ARCA staff from Nunavut Arctic College, and some other people saying thank you as well. Let me see if I didn't get, I think we got most of the questions. If you weren't able to get your question answered, please make sure you go to the PolarTREC link that I posted earlier in the chat area that has the link to Lesley's expedition, and she's posting journals, and you can comment and ask your questions on those journal pages. And you can also follow her online. She's on Facebook, and we've been sharing her journals through Twitter as well. So be sure to do that. And I think that's about it. Are you still there, Lesley? Did I lose you already?
I'm still here. I got like 3 more minutes of satellite.
Okay, yay, we're glad. So anyway, before her satellite goes out here, I want to say a big thank you to everybody that helped put this together today, especially Dr. Madsen and the IceCube team, and Lesley joining us from South Pole Station, Antarctica, and also NSF for funding these types of things. And all of you for joining us. I'm going to stop the archive, and then people that want to say hello or have additional comments, you're free to do so.